All right, today's presentation will be dealing with ROI and how that can be applied into the education world. So the learning today is, what is the business model of ROI? How can we apply this to education? We'll be looking at individual considerations versus the total institution, and give you some further reading, some further exploration on your own if you desire to pursue using ROI and a way to make sure that the investment that you are making inside of education has a good return on that investment. So, what exactly is ROI? It is a business model that demonstrates a great sense of accountability. It stands for a return on investment. And according to Reiser and Dempsey in 2018, it means that it's the benefit of investing in a program from a deeper business model sense. So what that means is the program that you are buying worth the investment, or are you paying more for the program than the cost that you are getting? A little bit later, we'll look at the actual math calculation for this. But a deeper question might actually become, as we're looking at how this applies to education, a deeper explanation could be, how does this apply to instructional design and technology? And in general, how does this apply to education? So looking at just the education aspect, and in the education world, this might be harder to understand. If you look down below in the graphic that is in the picture, this was designed by Z Torek and a guide to calculating ROI. And the formula is the return on investment will equal the amount gained, so how much you gain from something, minus the amount spent, divided by the amount spent. Then you multiply that to 100. The return on investment becomes a percentage at that point. How much is your return of investment? This is the basic formula for ROI in the business world, but again, it might be harder to quantify that in the education world. You might be able to use the business model, but in education, most of the time, this is harder to measure. In fact, most of the time, there is no monetary benefit to figuring out if you have a benefit cost. You just have what your students are doing in the classroom. So Robert Reiser and John Dempsey, in their book Trends and Issues in Educational Design and Technology, they decided to also give an alternative definition, which is that it is the value that a program has, and how can we calculate that in terms of education. So in looking at applying the math, you still really should be applying the math here and not just saying what you feel the value of the program is. The math needs to be a little bit different. For education applications of ROI, the benefit could be a mean raw score, where you take a 200-point scale, assuming that you're not purchasing a product that's over $200 for an entire year or entire school year even. If you are, you have to adjust the math a little bit to fit the needs of this. But you could look at the mean raw score minus the program cost divided by the program cost, and you multiply that by 100. So, for instance, a lot of things in education, they give you values, they give you test scores. You can be plotting the mean test scores or mean assessment scores through the use of the program, and then get an overall mean score and make it over 200 points and multiply the number that you get by 2 to do this. So, for instance, one of the programs that I personally use in my classroom is GimKit, which has a yearly value of $119.88. Looking at a mean score of how students did when using the program, I found that 66% is the highest that you can get if you had a perfect 100, and you can begin to scatter plot each of the various classes that you have if you're in the secondary level or even by student to see what the overall mean score is and whether or not it's a continual investment that is needed. Moving forward here, looking at the individual versus the institution, When you're looking at the different types of investment, sometimes a teacher or a school, they should look at the cost of investment and the return of that investment from an individual standpoint versus the entire organization. So, for instance, does the individual, if it's one person, does that apply to the ROI, and is it benefit for just a few people if the rest of the school is not actually using that? The one thing to remember from the ROI measurement, and the one thing that needs to be taken into account, and something that Dylan, Reef, and Thomas mentioned in their article, an ROI comparison of initiatives designed to attract diverse students, is that there needs to be the focus of the I in this. There needs to be that tangible focus when it comes to figuring out what the return of investment is and whether or not the return of investment is prudent. So the biggest thing to focus on is that I part of this, is the investment worthwhile or is it not worthwhile? It can also be used in the institutional sense, meaning you can apply ROI to an entire program. For instance, if a school decides to purchase a program, maybe the Google Suite for Education, maybe you purchase a school subscription to Quizlet, but you look at it and the school maybe only spends 1 hour of the entire school year using that program, the return of investment is low. You might need to be changing because you might be pulling money down that is not necessary, and it might not be benefiting a large investment. Now, one thing that the article Accounting for Institutional Variations and Expected Returns for Higher Education by Doris Tamberg and Cram, they had mentioned in their article was that it's very important for schools to understand this institutional aspect. In fact, in higher education formats, ROI is more strongly associated with college graduation rates. So, looking at like the high school realm, it might be more beneficial to look at an entire institutional impact of ROI and see if that impacts the high school graduation rates. And regardless of any sense, ROI can be effective and be used into the classroom to figure out if the investment that you are making in the classroom is actually a benefit to the classroom, or are you hurting your own self by continuing to make this investment for a program that's not having any benefit to your students. If you're looking for some additional reading and maybe some additional research, you can look at Dylan, Reef, and Thomas's article, an ROI comparison of initiatives designed to attract diverse students to technology careers. It has a lot of information about higher education in there. Doris Tamberg and Cram in 2017 wrote an Accounting for Institutional Variation and Expected Returns of Higher Education. A lot of good references in there as well to higher education. Reiser and Dempsey, their book Trends and Issues in Instructional Design Technology for the 4th edition, has an entire section on ROI. And again, if you want to see the image, you can, the link is there to go to the image of the equation. So thank you, and hope that you've learned some stuff for ROI. Any questions or comments, you can contact me. And I thank you.